This is what we need. This is what we need to all be talking to each other about. We don't just need to be crying about what's happening. This isn't our victim story. This is our victory story. And I think people are really rallying around at this point. Those in the fringe have pushed too far.
There it is.
Yeah.
They've pushed too long.
Yeah.
And they have awakened that giant. And I think it is awake, and I think we're going to see a real swing and turn around right now. And what better place to start than right here in Texas? I'm excited to say we are on Merritt Street Media production floors, and this is the set of Dr. Phil Primetime.
Yep.
And we are in, I think, this is our fourth week? I
think we're fourth week, yeah.
Yeah, and we've just launched this network, and boy, hold on to your hat, because we obviously had big expectations for Merritt Street Media and Dr. Phil Primetime and our news and all the programming, but we had no idea that it was going to be the rocket ride that it is. I mean, we hoped for that, but you don't want to jinx yourself. But wow, what an experience this has been, and what a response we've gotten from people all across the United States, online, linear, over the air, our app, everything. It's just been such a tremendous vote of confidence from people that we're on the right road.
I'm going to pull a Dr. Phil and say, you're not going to filibuster here just all day today. That's your line, right? Yeah.
I might have said that once or twice.
One or two times. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, yes. Thank you for joining.
My pleasure.
Kind of the combination of the Dr. Phil program, yeah, and TBN and our Praise program. And Texas is a big deal to the three of us. I'm a resident of Texas. My wife and I have been residents. TBN bought a full-power TV station here in 1987. We are in the little sleepy little town it used to be, Colleyville, Texas.
Right.
Yeah, it's grown up a bit.
We don't have many sleepy towns anymore.
Not hardly. And the idea of why, Dr. Phil, you and I are sitting here today, we're welcoming in the Lieutenant Governors, is I like what you said. We certainly had high expectations for a project that I think we ought to explain a little bit, maybe even to the Lieutenant Governor. We're going to get in. Today's purpose is we want to talk about some issues. We want to take the first month of the Dr. Phil content, kind of break down some of the higher explosive situations, DEI, the border, transgender, anti-Semitism, which feels like it's in the news every day recently. But the idea that we're sitting here together really comes from what's your side of the story? If we were just sitting here, three hairy-legged guys talking about something, what got us to this point right here, Doc?
Well, I spent 21 years on CBS talking about really psychological issues that were pretty much focused on marriage and family and parenting and all the things that we deal with at that level. But across the years, I saw the challenges changing, what people were asking about changing. And we've become, maybe because of the internet, maybe because of social media platforms, much more socially conscious, and parents feeling much more challenged about what their families were going through. Mm-hmm. And I really felt like family in America is under attack. Some of it's unintended, some of it is very targeted. And so I just think as a country, we've got issues. And I decided I needed to broaden the scope of what I was dealing with to answer those questions and challenges from the folks. And so that's how this was all born. And I've written the book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. And there are things that people are afraid to talk about. Mm-hmm. They're just afraid to talk about it because they get targeted and canceled. But you've got to be bold and step up and talk about those things. DEI is one of those things that I think is really a cancer on this society. I think it's a terrible thing for all parties involved. Those that it's intended to help, and I think maybe it started with good intentions.
Sure.
But it certainly doesn't have good consequence. And so we've talked about that, and of course that upsets a lot of people, but the fact of the matter is, it's not a good program. It's not a good program. It's reverse racism. and they ignore certain things, like they've dismissed the SAT, for example. But the research says that's one of the ways that some of these young children in the inner city, for example, can pole vault out of that situation because it recognizes talent and intellect and genius. And a lot of the educators say, we've seen that research, but we don't want to be judged, so we don't go back to using it, even though we know empirically it's the thing to do.
Yeah.
What in the world is going on?
Lieutenant Governor, what has the state of Texas done to jump in on this issue of DEI?
So we banned it last session, where it's done. We also passed a bill out of the Senate to ban tenure, and because that's a large problem, that we have these professors, even in a conservative state like Texas, we have a lot of liberal leftist professors on campus. And when you give someone a job for life, Dr. Phil, and they're not accountable to anyone, where they literally will say, the Senate faculty, which is a group of professors on each campus, Senate faculty, they said, we're not going to listen to the Senate. We're going to focus on our policies. And so I responded, and I said, wait a minute, you're a public institution. You're funded by the taxpayers. And so if that's your attitude, then maybe we need to look at tenure. And of course they freaked out. And I don't think they thought we'd ever pass it, but the members supported it, and we banned DEI. And the University of Texas has already let a number of people go. And we're actually, Dr. Phil, going to have an audit coming up in weeks in our legislature in the Senate. I want to know what every one of our state schools are doing, because I don't want them to just say, oh, we ended DEI, but we gave it another title and we shifted someone over here.
Yeah.
If that's the way you think, we don't want you on campus. Meritocracy is the way our nation grew. And I know you had a guest on one of your shows saying the same thing that I've thought about. If we're going to have DEI, put it in Major League Baseball, the NFL, and the NBA, and soon you're going to see sports owners say, nope, I'm sorry, I don't want 3 Asians and 2 Hispanics on my basketball team and a slow white guy. Sorry, I'm sorry. We got to level the playing field, right? Because that's the reverse of what's happening.
Wow.
So we banned it in Texas.
Well, and Merit Street Media, the name Merit was not chosen at random.
Right.
It was chosen to reflect the driving force that has made this country what it is. And everything, all of this push by these liberal professors that are overrepresented on college campuses, that we're going to struggle and work towards equality of outcome, is a higher form of insanity. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I've said you can't have somebody sitting at home in a beanbag eating Cheetos all day, and they're going to have the same outcome as somebody that's out there in the field or at the hospital or whatever, working their tail off all day long, and you're all going to have the same outcome. It just doesn't make sense. No. That won't work. It's been tried. It didn't work. And we need to get back to recognizing hard work, talent, added value, all of the things that have gotten us where we are. And are we where we need to be? Of course not. We need to struggle and work towards equality of opportunity. Can we do a better job at that? Of course we can. We need to work harder at it, but not equality of outcome.
Dr. Phil and I got exposed to some statistics that really shaped what Merit Street is. And we found that, it's about 80% of the country that identify as God-fearing. Yes. Okay. Flag saluting. And so that means there's about 10%, what do you call it, Doc? The tyranny of the fringe. And so we're really voicing, make sure somebody doesn't tune into this as we tick through some of these issues and say, look at that, 3 old, white, gray-haired dudes sitting around pontificating. This is really common sense. Make sure, Doc, tell me your theme. If I squeezed you and common sense comes out, what are you trying to really tell America?
I'm trying to get people to examine themselves and get back to the core values that they really hold near and dear, and not give too much attention to the loudest voice. The loudest voice oftentimes is the shrill, fringe voices that are trying to rewrite history, biology, science, economies, all of these sort of things that they have no basis for what they're peddling. It's just that's how they want it to be. Well, that's not how it is. And I'm not a political animal at all. You can talk about left, right. My side is factual. It's empirical. Let's just deal with reality. And I think common sense is just not common enough anymore. And I think when I say families are under attack, church membership has dropped below 50% for the first time in our country's history. It's dropped below 50%. Now, why is that important? Well, that's a time that families usually worship together. They come together, spend quality time together. They have dinner together usually afterwards. They go to church and they spend quiet time, reflecting and, spend time with the Lord. They spend time that they're off their devices. They're not playing video games. They're not in this high-speed transient world. And for that to drop below, it's because, what are they doing? Everybody wants to belong somewhere. What are they joining? What are they worshiping? What is happening? And it's not good for the family. We need to get back to some of those things. And, people know the truth when they hear it.
Yes.
And when you speak the truth, people embrace that. And I think that's why Merritt Street Media, our news and my show and some of the other programming we have been embraced so passionately just in the short time that we've been on the air.
So Dan, you ever been in church before? You ever show up and do the worship thing in church?
I want to be the first elected official who becomes a pastor as opposed to the first pastor becomes an elected official.
I like
and by
that.
the way, there's a great movement right now in America to get pastors to not only get the vote out, and again, it doesn't matter who they're voting for, but they need to partake in democracy.
Sure.
And, all the stats show that people of faith, only about one out of every four vote.
That's shocking.
And so one of the reasons I think we're losing that voice, Dr. Phil, is people of faith aren't stepping up, because if they did, we could get back to the basics in our schools, in our life, in our businesses. We are working on a curriculum right now in Texas to get us back to teaching not necessarily the Bible per se, but the stories from the Bible. The story of Esther can have a very powerful influence. To study what happened in the Roman Empire, to study all of these things through life that when we grew up and went to school, we had that foundation, plus going to church, when more than half the people used to go to church. So I think there's a great hunger for it, a great thirst for it. And you touched on something, Dr. Phil, when you said some of it's accidental in the families and some of it's intentional. I believe there's a strong movement in this country that wants to remove God from society. They want to break up the nuclear family. I think that's part of the transgender issue. I mean, we're born in the image of God. And when you're saying you have a right to change God's image, that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah.
And we've been in this fight in Texas since 2017. The government back in 2017 said boys must be allowed in every school in America, in every bathroom, in every girls' room if they wanted to be. Boys must be allowed to go in the girls' room and the locker rooms. And we fought it back in Texas. And at the time, I made the statement, the federal government can keep their 30 pieces of silver. We'll fund our own schools. We're not going to be told what to do. And this whole concept, Dr. Phil, how did we get to where people are actually arguing that it's okay for boys to play girls' sports and men to play women's sports and to take away these opportunities and people normalize it? How did that happen?
I really think that is the tyranny of the fringe. I think we've got some people with an agenda, and if you look at some of that ideology that's, I guess, has been identified as the woke mob. And by the way, being woke was a good thing. when you think about it initially, if you look at the definition of being woke, it's a wonderful thing. It means that you're really tuned in and sensitive to people that are disadvantaged in some way, and you don't turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to that. That was a good thing until it became weaponized.
Yes.
And now, then all of a sudden, it's not that you're trying to help those. You're starting to create new classes of victims and new groups of the oppressed. And you're defining everything as the oppressor and oppressed. And if you create a new class and say, well, these people are oppressed, so we've got to fight for their rights. And this is, and let me filibuster for about 90 seconds here, because what's happened here is we've got a middle part of America here that has always had kind of a live and let live attitude. It's like, hey, love your neighbor and live and let live. Whereas the fringe groups, they're much more efficient cultural warriors because they identify an enemy, they target someone, and they rally towards going after that enemy. And so they're kind of a guerrilla warfare, and they're going after that enemy. So a small group can have a big impact, whereas all of the vast majority here are saying, we don't want to pick on anybody. We want everybody to get along. But we are in a culture war, and you can't be a non-combatant. You've got to stand up and say, what is it I believe? That I set forth 10 principles in my book, We've Got Issues, that I think are important for a healthy society. And number one is be who you are on purpose. Live with intention. Decide, what do I believe? What is important for my family? And we're going to do that on purpose. And that's what we need, is a call to action for this 80% in the middle, and say, I know what I believe. I know what's important, and it's family and it's core values, and I'm going to stand up for that, and I'm not going to be quiet.
Yeah. When we got into and I was attacked back in 17, they called it, Dan Patrick wants the bathroom bill. And I just knew, Dr. Phil, that where most of Texans were and Americans, women didn't want men in the ladies' room.
Right.
And fathers didn't want some man walking in if their daughter was in the bathroom. And but that was the big push. And thankfully, we've won that fight. There were some businesses, I won't name them, but some big department stores that said, no, we're going to open up our dressing rooms. Well, women stopped shopping there. Yeah. And today, if you think about it, there aren't many businesses doing that. And some of the businesses that are really seeing their customers stop coming, because they're seeing any man taking advantage of the opportunity to go in and assault a woman or a teenage girl. And we just can't have that in society. I shouldn't have to pass bills to stop that nonsense, but we have, and we'll continue to do so. And
I like that thought there, Dan, is I shouldn't have to pass bills.
Right.
We shouldn't have to be having to have some of the conversations we're having. Welcome to almost the beginnings of a joke. A California TV host, a politician, and a TV evangelist all sat down together one day. And no one even knows who's really hosting this. You asked the last question.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
We're all broadcasters.
It's my nature as my television background. I'm sorry about that.
So we're at the Dr. Phil set right here in Fort Worth, Texas. And if you look us up, the actual address, sometimes it says Roanoke, sometimes it says Fort Worth, depending on which search engine you use. But wherever it is, we love it. It's right here in the heart of Texas. A picture was coming to my mind.
And we're proud to have you. We're proud to have you.
Well, thank you.
We're glad to be here. And if you take America and kind of look at the map of the United States, and we've been talking about the tyranny of the fringe. Somehow, even geographically, we have a little bit of the tyranny of the fringe kind of vibe, at the coast. We're right in the middle of the heart of the rest of the country, and we're messaging out Merritt Street, and that was not, we didn't just wander into that. In fact, what I remember, Dr. Phil, is I was sitting in a green room somewhere. Can't remember exactly, maybe it was in Nashville. And he walks into the green room, kind of points his finger and goes, Merritt Street Media. Remember that?
I do. Yeah.
And so back up a little bit. Give me, you were riding on an airplane with some of your colleagues and that all just kind of popped up. What was the thought progression that really led to even your writing of your book, We've Got Issues, and also the name of the new network that we're proud to announce been on the air about a month now?
Yes, and the idea is, we wanted this to stand for something because we wanted a destination network, and everything has to be congruent, from the name down to the programming, and when I say a destination network, we want something that people can turn on and leave on all day and not worry that their children are going to walk through the room and see something that they don't want them to see, that it will be okay. And I think that's so important, and we've put together a programming slate where I think that's really come true. And I'm really proud of what we put together. We have a really novel approach to the news here that I think has got a certain elegance of simplicity to it. What we do is go on the news, we tell them what happened, and then we shut up.
Right.
We say, here's what happened.
The way it used to be.
These are the facts.
Right.
This is what happened. A, B, C, D. Next story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because you insult people when you start telling them what to think, and that's a real problem that's going on in the schools. It's going on in the universities, K through 12 in the universities. They're so busy telling these young people what to think that they forgot about teaching them how to think. And we've got to do that. There's an absence of critical thinking going on. And everything I do on my show is about trying to stimulate critical thought.
Yeah.
Trying to get people to think, did you think about the consequences of this? I had Dr. Carol Hooven on the show that was talking about transgender athletes. All she did was report data.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just report data. She did a meta-analysis of dozens of studies and said, here's the data. She's from Harvard, been there 20 years. And because the data didn't come out to fit the liberal agenda, they drummed her out of Harvard after 20 years. Yeah. Drummed her out just for reporting the data. She didn't make it up. She didn't even do the studies. She just read them. Yep. Drummed her out.
My goodness.
Unbelievable. That is not okay. We should be offended by that. We should stand up and we should push back.
And I think we have to realize that some of this isn't just people who want to be inclusive. This is a real, and we do want to be inclusive, and we want to give everyone an American opportunity. And we don't want kids bullied, and we love everyone as Christians. But there is a moment when you say, as you just said, you have to say, wait a minute, I have a purpose that I'm standing for, and this isn't right, and what are the consequences? And the side that's pushing this, they don't talk about any consequences. When I got in that argument with the federal government in 2017 about boys in the girls' bathrooms, I talked to the superintendent of Fort Worth Independent School District, and they had 6 children who identified as transgender out of 80,000. And one of the things that I think has been so dangerous in this whole argument is they have pushed a lot of children who would never have thought about going down that path, and they've taken advantage of them for their own political gain. And it's a tragedy. And now you see some of these children want to come back. They're sorry for what happened. And we passed legislation again that says we hold parents accountable. You cannot force your children to have surgery under a certain age because you think it's a good idea. Right. Because a 10-year-old can't make up that decision. Right. And so we have to stand up and push back because there's a real group pushing God out. Yep. And trying to undermine our family, and I think it's purposeful.
When did common sense become hate speech, Well,
you see it everywhere, and that's what I say, that we've got to kind of wake up the middle. I know you've probably been dozens of times, but I made a visit to the border.
Yes.
And boy, you talk about dedicated men and women that are standing post on the border down there. Because I expected that there were going to be morale problems and all down there, and there certainly are some. Because we've got guards down there that have become social workers. They're processing instead of guarding. They're
hotel clerks.
Yeah, they just these people come running towards some of the federals down there because they know that's a 10-year ticket right there. If I can get to a green uniform, I got a 10-year ticket.
Wow.
But what dedicated men and women down there doing what they're doing. But I've been very involved in monitoring this fentanyl crisis that we're dealing with that's coming across the border down there. The influx of military-aged Chinese nationals that are coming across the borders in California and some in Arizona and Texas, mostly California. And the drugs that are flowing across, and it is really concerning. At least in Texas, we're fighting back and pushing back. But I'm very pro-immigration, as I've said in the shows that we've done about this. We need immigrants in this country. We need them for a variety of reasons. One being that our birth rate has dropped so low. We need some input. We need the talent. We need the passion. We need the skill sets. But I think of America as my home, just like I think of my home with a front door. I would not open the front door and just let anybody come flooding in and start sleeping in the rooms. I'd want to know who these people are and what's their intention. And I think of America as my home. Why are we just opening the door and letting people come? We don't know who they are. I interviewed a gentleman recently that has worked for Homeland Security and the border and all. And he says that there's a memo from DHS that says they are very well aware that Venezuela has emptied their prisons and their drug rehabs, emptied them, with the one caveat, you've got to go to America. And he said there are hundreds of thousands have been turned out as long as they go to America. And so they're flooding the streets here. And people don't know this.
It was a Venezuelan who killed Lake and Riley.
Exactly.
Wow.
Who had a criminal
What
record.
else can Texas do, America in general do?
So we're obviously very concerned. We're on the front line. When when I joined the Senate back in 2007, our budget was almost zero on the border. It was a different time.
Right.
Over time, it grew to a couple $100 million a year. And now our budget is $2 billion a year to do what the federal government's, that's Texas taxpayer money. It could be spent in healthcare, it could be spent in education. And we shouldn't have to be doing that. You mentioned the people from China coming here, Dr. Phil. In 2019, we apprehended about 340. In 2022, it was over 20,000. Young men from China, 19 to 40, and this year, already through the end of March, 24,000. So you don't get out of China on your own.
Right.
So, I think it's a dangerous fifth column that could be forming. Of all the people who are coming here, you always hear the numbers of 2 million have been apprehended every year. That's the ones who come in and give up. That doesn't count the people who we see and can't catch because we can't get there in time. We see them on our thousands of cameras we have, or the ones that we don't see. Here's an astounding fact. The border between Texas and Mexico is further than the distance from Atlanta to Portland, Maine. Now, we're not a straight line. It's a little zigzaggy, but we can't cover every mile. But we actually had it under control, and now it's wide open. So when they say 2 million are coming in every year, that's the ones apprehended. Add another million seen and not caught, and law enforcement would tell you if we catch 1 out of 2, we're doing well. So we're talking about 5 million a year. We may be up. MIT did a study, matched up with some numbers I'd been working on a few years ago. I would say today, we're closing in on 12 to 15% of the population here. We don't know who they are. We've arrested nearly 300 people on the terrorist watch list. Now, how many of those people haven't we arrested that we didn't catch?
It would be terribly naive to think we're catching 100%.
Of course not.
So they're in the country.
Yes.
We don't know where. We don't know what they're doing, but
Right.
they certainly, our interests are certainly not aligned.
Right.
Wow.
And where are they living? Where, you know, I always talk about this. Where are they going? You know, they're not allowed to work, allegedly. They're not allowed to get health care benefits from the allegedly. Where are they going? Yeah. And they filter out society, and you can't, if you can't work, then how do you make money? You make a life a crime, or you're finding a way to live off the government. This is, a country without a border cannot survive. It just can't survive. And so if we don't, we're doing everything we can in Texas, and you're right, Dr. Phil, I've been down there a lot. I'm going down there next week again. These men and women who put their lives on the line. You know, we had a National Guard soldier who drowned because he was down there near Eagle Pass with his family on a Sunday afternoon and saw someone drowning in the river, and he wanted to save them. And he saved that family, but he drowned. And I get so frustrated when I hear mainstream media talking about how harsh we are. We're trying to, my job is to protect Texans' lives and American lives and to keep law and order. But we're sacrificing our own men and women, giving their lives to people that are total strangers. And look, the federal government's policies of letting them come, they're actually encouraging people who can't swim to swim across the river. I mean, that's what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Dr. Phil, before everyone just gets depressed and you have to start being a doctor and get us out of this funk, help me explain to the TBN audience that, you know, what we've said around here, Lieutenant Governor, is that, you know, TBN literally talks about the person of Jesus.
Yes.
Merritt Street talks about the principles
right.
Of Jesus. And that's a completely different set of guests. That's a completely different set of, sometimes there's somebody that kind of can talk in both
yes.
effective ways, you know, you being one of them. You know, at some point you can stand at Second Baptist Church and
yeah.
take a text and open a Bible and kind of fill in for Pastor Ed Young down there. And you can also stand at the, in front of the Senate and make a speech and do all that kind of stuff. So you understand what we're trying to do, trying to message in both ways. So I'm going to say that I'm redefining in a lot of ways what Christian TV is. Because if you're talking about the principles that are found in God's Word, that's
right.
still Christian TV, regardless of whether
yeah.
you're trying or intending for that content to be, you know, evangelistic. Right. You know, at some point, we're trying to do, you know, at some point both, and we're doing it very specifically. Today, we're talking about Merritt Street. You're sitting here. It's a big initiative of TBN.
Yes.
Merritt Street is here in Texas. Dr. Phil is the spearhead of it. We need to support this guy because he's bringing all this common sense, which now in some people's estimation sounds like some kind of hate speech, and it's
right.
just plain old common
hate.
Texas common sense. Okay?
If we could remove the labels, which happened a little bit in North Carolina, and take the R&D off, and I'm a proud Republican, but I'm just saying, if you take the R&D and you just had a slate of God's principles, put God first, family, country, law and order, which includes a secure border, a smaller government so that people have more of their own money to spend. There are people from Democrats, Republicans, independents who would vote for that slate. Let's put school choice in there, all these opportunities. And I think one of the things I love about your newscast and your principle is all of the networks, all of them, pit the loudest Republican against the loudest Democrat, who usually, there are people who don't ever pass a bill. They can't get a bill passed, but they like to be on television. And I'm on it a lot, but I like to pass bills. And you pit them together. And the truth is, like in Texas, we pass about 1,500 bills a year, Dr. Phil. This would amaze people. 99% passed with Republican and Democrat votes.
My goodness.
99%. And the issues that really separate us, life issues, maybe some Second Amendment issues, maybe the transgender issue, some of those issues separate the parties. But we work together in Texas. I'm proud of what we do in the Texas Senate. Our budget passes 31-0. That's the furthest person on the left and the furthest person on the right, because state governments have to build schools and build roads and take care of medical issues. The federal government doesn't do that. They haven't passed a budget. I mean, every state's required to pass a budget that balances, and they don't. So, the exciting thing about having you all here is you've joined the people who come here. Since 2000, we've added 11 million people. So we were 18 million people, we're now 30, and we're going to add another 15 million in the next 15 to 20 years.
My goodness.
And I always like to say, no one moves to Texas. They arrive here, and Texas moves into them. And when they travel, where are you from? If you travel around the world, they don't say America. I'm from Texas. And they get their boots and they go to the rodeo and they listen to George Strait, and there you go.
Speaking of boots, you win the boot award today for sure. These boots are made for walking. And that's what they're going to do.
The Alamo on one and the Capitol on the other. You can't go wrong.
So, Doc, that was a bit of a filibuster. It sounded that sounded a little bit like a campaign speech there for a second.
I didn't mean. We're proud of Texas. We are proud of Texas. We're just proud of Texas. That's why people are coming.
This is your set. You could have jumped in there.
I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I liked it. I mean,
the America that all America used to be is Texas.
That's right. We always said you never ask somebody if they're from Texas. If they are, they'll tell you. And if they're not, you're just going to embarrass them.
This really happened. You're going to think I made this up, but this really happened. I was in India, and I was sitting with a very wealthy Indian gentleman. I was about to say his name. I'll keep his name. He owned the hotel, and the hotel, I wanted to shoot a feature motion picture. So I shot a film called One Night with the King that went into theaters back in 2007. And this guy had built a hotel that literally we needed as a location. So one thing led to another. I met with this businessman. He flew in and on his Sikorsky helicopter. It landed in the backyard of the hotel. He comes, and we're sitting there. Super nice guy. We're sitting there, and I explain what we want to do with the hotel, and we'd be bringing, Hollywood and Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole would be on set. And he asked a couple of questions like, well, what about the cables that would be laid across, And I said, there'll be a little bit. What about the inconvenience of the guests that might be there, wanting to have some solitude? And I was doing my best, convincing version of myself. And I said, you know what? All your guests during that time, they're going to love it. They're going to get to see this movie being made and all this. And I just, and he said, but what about maybe that somebody might have to, not be at the pool for a little while, and you know what, they're going to love it, and I just kept railroading past, and he finally looked at me. I swear to you, he said this. He looked at me real serious. He goes, "Are you from Texas?" And I said, "Well, I have a place in Texas. And he goes, "Why do you ask?" He goes, "Because people from Texas don't listen." And he said, "It would be an inconvenience to my guests, so no."
That's really a great story.
And so oftentimes Laurie looks across at the table and says, "Are you from Texas?"
Yeah.
So we
love our state.
We do. I want to get into one of the issues, what we've been breaking down, and we've been kind of peppering little clips in today's program with me, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Dr. Phil McGraw. We've been peppering in some of these things. We've had, Dr. Phil, you've had some of your social media clips go viral, and we've talked about the border, we've talked about DEI, we've talked about some transgender issues that have been some of the more explosive, viral videos from the show. Anti-Semitism feels like it's kind of the du jour thing. I mean, I'm talking about as we're taping this, we're talking right here in the April, May 2024. This is a big issue right now. And I mean, here in Texas, I saw people getting zip tied and drug off campuses, and this is going on. Dr. Phil, you and I did a program together that has had reverberations around the world. When you stood in front of an Israeli flag and made a passionate appeal for common sense in regard to that, and it hundreds of millions of views around the world on social media platforms. The government of Israel contacted TBN and wanted your speech in 2 languages, and we translated it, and we did this, we sent it. It's been sent all over the world by the government of Israel. And that was show number 1 of Dr. Phil on Merritt Street Media. So proud of that night. I was sitting in the audience as you were taping that episode. And by the way, if you ever hear somebody going, yeah, in the audience, that's usually me. I'm sitting back there, yeah. Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, okay. So jump into that issue and let's talk about that issue, and then let's start trying to find a way to put a spin of hope on what we're talking about. If I get a couple of pretty well seasoned veteran guys in front of me, I need you guys to spit out a little bit of hope for us in regard to this nonsense that we feel like we're waking up to every day. But let's at least touch on the anti-Semitism piece for just a touch.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm seeing and hearing things on some of our college campuses right now that I truly never thought I would hear in my lifetime. I've had some of the Hitler youth camp rhetoric translated so I could understand what was being said. And a lot of what I'm hearing now is as bad or worse on our college campuses. And it's just, it's shocking to me. And I'm hopeful that at some point people are going to wake up to the fact that, hatred towards a group of people and celebrating a terrorist group just doesn't make any kind of sense whatsoever. And I think it's this absence of critical thinking where people are not going below the surface and looking, when they're walking around chanting from the river to the sea, they surely can't understand that they're talking about wiping out a complete race of people, and the genocide of everyone in Israel. I'm holding on to hope that they just don't understand what they're saying. And what we saw on October 7th was the worst loss of Jewish life since in a day since the Holocaust. And it's astounding to me how quickly that gets forgotten because there's loss of life in Palestine. And look, nobody wants to see loss of life ever. War is a very ugly thing, but people that are killed because a bomb is dropped as an act of war after massive declarations that, hey, this is going to happen. We're going to drop a bomb here coming after an enemy. And so you need to clear out of this area. We're warning you. We're telling you in advance. Who does that? But we're telling you in advance. A million different communiques with drop leaflets and text messages and everything to clear out. We're going to do this. That's not the moral equivalent of killing infants in their cribs when assassins come across and attack. There's no moral equivalent to that. And we have people here that are celebrating that, but we have so many Americans that are standing up against that. And I'm the incurable optimist, and I believe that people know the difference between right and wrong. As I've said, I don't understand the history. I can't recite the history of Israel, and it goes back thousands years plus, and I know it didn't all start on October 7th. I'm not a geopolitical expert, but I don't need to be to know right from wrong.
Right.
And what happened that day was wrong, and you can't expect that that's going to happen, and there's not going to be retaliation. I hate that it's ongoing. I wish it could all end, and it can end. As soon as Hamas comes to the border and surrenders, they can end it all right there. They return the hostages and the terrorists surrender, then it can end. But it's not going to end with them holding hostages and continuing to be across the chain link fence wanting everybody on the other side to die. That's not a workable situation. And to have people here celebrating those terrorists doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't know what they expect them to do.
Dan, put a sense of hope. We're talking about tough issues. We're talking about, four things that, my parents didn't talk about on Christian TV.
Right.
My dad didn't think that he would probably ever even see a day like we're sitting in today.
Sure.
So we're having to modify even what we discuss, but give us some hope in regard to what we're talking about today.
First, thank both of you for participating in this, and I hope I didn't sound too campaigny before. I wasn't trying to. I just think that we as Christians shouldn't be afraid to talk about political things.
Heck yeah.
And people in politics shouldn't be afraid to talk about their faith. I met David McCullough, the great writer, wrote 1776 and Adams and Jefferson years ago, and he said something to me that really struck a chord. He said, there's no such thing as history. It's only events in the context of time. And when we look back on the founders, or we look back on Lincoln, or we look back on Eisenhower on D-Day, or President Bush after 9/11, we assume that they knew they would win. And so it diminishes that they took risk, and great risk. They didn't know the outcome. And I think this is where we are now as a country. 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people, everyone knows watching, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and ask for forgiveness for their sins and heal their nation, I will hear them from heaven. As a baby Christian, or maybe even before I was a committed believer, I used to think that if my people were Americans. And what I'm learning now, it's not. It's the Christians.
Wow.
That's his people. And so we as Christians, if we don't step into the fight and do it smartly, and measure our words carefully so that we don't turn away people, but bring them in, if we don't stand up, 30 years from now, will they look back and say, what did they do? We can lose this country. This is nothing. This isn't political. This is about a faith-based country that has lost its way from Madalyn Murray O'Hara kicking God out of the classrooms in prayer in the 60s to where we are now, to where we have these students on college campuses. They don't know where the river is. They don't know where the sea is, you said, and they have no sense of history. And these liberal professors that are all of this, it's coming to a head. And I would just say I'm hopeful because America has always turned out on the winning side because people are willing to fight. If you go back to the Alamo, independence, liberty, and freedom. That's what Israel's fighting for. That's what Ukraine's fighting for. And we can't, as Christians, if we say, well, we can't engage, then we could lose. So I'm hopeful.
Give me a hope bomb, Dr. Phil.
Well, I do believe people know the difference between right and wrong. And when I'm in front of millions of people and the messages that we get on our message boards, the messages we get from the audiences here in studio, the people that I'm seeing as I move about this country, they are hopeful and they are leaning forward and they do love this country and they are optimistic. I don't see anybody looking for that window where you go to quit.
Yeah.
I don't see that. There's not a window where you go to quit. It's kind of like when you're a young parent and you can't sleep, you got kids all up all night, you go where's the window you go to you quit? There's not one, and there's not one where you go to quit as an American. And what I've been struck by is nobody seems to be looking for that window. Everybody seems to be saying, we're going to stay the course here. I think that's why we're getting such a reaction to what we're doing. People are saying, this is what we need. This is what we need to all be talking to each other about. We don't just need to be crying about what's happening. This isn't our victim story. This is our victory story. And I think people are really rallying around at this point. Those in the fringe have pushed too far.
There it is.
Yeah.
They've pushed too long.
Yes.
And they have awakened that giant. And I think it is awake, and I think we're going to see a real swing and turn around right now. And what better place to start than right here in Texas?
Merritt Street Media is on the air, and we've got some announcements for growth coming very soon. Significant growth for Merritt Street Media. Already, probably, arguably, the largest launch of a television channel in at least decades, if not ever. Dr. Phil, you're the tip of the spear. We're behind you. You got a lieutenant governor behind you. You got a state behind you. We're speaking on behalf of common sense, the principles of Jesus. And here on TBN, we talk about Jesus. Over there, we talk about the principles of Jesus. And I think that actually is a helpful situation for our audience. When you're laying in the hospital recovering from a surgery, you don't necessarily want to watch something. You want to watch somebody singing or preaching or praying. You want that kind of content. And but man, when you're feeling a little chippy, you want to get up, you want to hear what's going on, get after it. And thank you for what both of you do. Amazing show today. Hey, thanks for the use of your set, by the way, Doc. Appreciate it.
I'm proud to have you anytime.
It's a beautiful set. Thanks for the invite. We'll see you next time.